Okay. So, I thought I'd just try to get you to think about some of this sort of stuff. And if we can start to think about, but we're not really talking about rocket science here. So what I'd like to do is actually just throw you a challenge of including someone like Devon in the Macbeth class. Okay? So this is, you know, obviously, you all know Macbeth, don't you? Yeah, oh really well. Yeah, okay, sort of fine. And you've got Devon, you're the English teacher, you're trying to include Devon in that particular class. How would you do it? Yeah. Okay. Yep. So he could be given see what we're doing here? He's been actually pre-programmed so that at the point he could press the thing to actually say that line from that character. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, yeah. So in other words, he could be engaged in that lesson there. What else can we do?
Can we get him to present maybe the settings of Scotland or something like that?
Yeah.
Get him to research set the scene for the play.
Do we all know about Google?
Yes, we need to YouTube clips.
Okay, so in other words, we can Google in terms of finding YouTube clips that we might actually put in there that he could actually present to the class about what is actually going on there, about what the thing. Talking about Scotland, okay, go and research Scotland. Give us a little bit of background. So you actually present to the class what Scotland's about. We're not really talking about rocket science, yeah.
You can make the costumes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, how obvious? Yeah, sorry. So, but there he is. You know, he can actually be building the producing, you know, that sort of stuff in terms of that. Take a little bit of a bigger picture here. What do you? Well, let's ask you. What do you know about Macbeth?
Murder and mayhem.
Yeah, murder and mayhem. Yeah. Yes. Everyone know that? Now, if you didn't know that, people would say, where did you go to school? See, that's an essential bit of information about Macbeth, isn't it? Who wrote it? So it's essential that he gets that bit of information. Okay, after that, what do you know about Macbeth? Murder and mayhem, yeah, okay. Can't remember. It's pretty thin, isn't it? Yeah.
Ghosts and witches.
Ghosts and witches, yeah, witches. Okay, all remember that? You know, hubble bubble, toil and trouble, all that stuff. So now we're starting to push us all, aren't we, about where we're actually in terms of Macbeth. So it doesn't matter that he doesn't come out knowing the play. He does need to come out knowing who wrote it and some general stuff. And I bet you, if we had him in the class Macbeth, he'd know more about Macbeth than you do. Could you see how we could do that fairly easily, even with someone like Devon? We can actually include him in that same lesson material without actually sort of going to any... It's not rocket science. This is the whole thing I'm trying to get across, is that this stuff isn't rocket science. It's a matter of saying, okay, what do I really need to teach here? What do I want everyone to know? How can I teach it to this particular child and have it so he's engaged in that same lesson along with everyone else? We can actually do that. Let's take some stuff where at a university I still have problems with some of my students, like how to write a sentence. What do you need to know about writing a sentence? I love it. Starts with a capital and ends with a full stop. Boy, I wish some students would have that. Okay, so that's the basic information that many students don't have, but it's really key information. Can I teach that to Devon? That's easy, isn't it? You know, point to the right sentence. Even if we've got a child who can't even do anything apart from point, or even I point, I can still show him two sentences and say, point to the correct one. Look at the correct one. I've got him engaged in that lesson. And I can test whether he's actually got it or not in that same lesson along with everyone else. What else do we need to know about a sentence? Well, this is testing your primary school knowledge, isn't it? Excellent. We probably don't need to get that, but
Oh, it's got somebody doing something to somebody else.
yes, well, yes, so it must have two things. Well, it must have one thing actually, but it normally has two things. Or three things. Yeah, noun, verb. Basically, it must have a verb. It can't be a sentence without a verb. Can you give me a sentence with just a verb?
Run.
Yeah, run. Okay, but what have most sentences got? It's got a verb and two other things. Sorry? Meaning, yes, it certainly will have meaning in it, but a subject and an object. Okay, John went to the beach. Subject, John, the object, beach. Verb, went. Can I teach that to a child with a disability? See, we're talking about stuff that's actually manageable. So when we actually come... Now, obviously, we want the general students to know much, much more than that, but the same as Michelle was doing it, he'd come out with the core information, but then they were pushing other students much, much further. You know, like the atomic weights and all of that stuff was actually going on. But again, if we look at that situation of the of the whole range of stuff, we don't actually know much. We don't remember much from primary school, do we? Or school. We lose a huge amount of it, but we're all educated people. So maybe we don't need to know this huge amount of stuff that everyone seems to think that we actually know. So I want to we'll take this over to Darryl, but just actually start to go into a little bit of this, of actually what sort of works in relation to this and how it might actually go. So I'll try and get the right one up this time. So I was actually trying to show a little film. Okay. Okay, the first thing is to go back to that, what Darryl was talking about. What is it? What do we mean by inclusion? Because I've even heard of an inclusive special school. It doesn't make any sense to me. If inclusion means anything, it's got to mean everyone, isn't it? It's got to apply to anyone. So if you look at that definition there, this is the same definition that Darryl was saying, they're in the same amount of time as everyone else. You've got to be in it to win it, haven't you? You've got to be there. You can't be included if you're somewhere else. So that's the first thing. The same rate as everyone else, not in and out. Socially belonging. So you're included in that, including in the class and school rules, but these schools and rules need to be adapted. If you've got a child who can't stand high levels of noise, is that fair? You know, we've got to actually drop that, change the environment and so forth. And then the same curriculum as all the other people. Would you agree that that's what you mean about anyone being included? So it's this, we showed that this morning. These are the different models that have appeared over time. The first one was you weren't allowed in at all. That was up to 1979. Second one is you could get educated but somewhere else. You're off somewhere else in this segregated unit or whatever it is, centre. This is the most common one now. Probably they call it integration, but it means you're segregated in the classroom with an aide or maybe a little group of all the kids with a disability all together. That's on-site segregation. That's not what we're talking about. That if you they did that with girls, do you reckon we'd accept that? In other words, you know, we just all the girls. No, they're down the back of the room with the aide while we teach the boys. Would that work? No, it's just clearly that wouldn't be acceptable. Really what we're talking about is the top one where everyone is included in the whole sort of thing. Okay, so let's look at this. So the fundamental thing of what we're trying to do is build an inclusive culture. Now, if any of you are teachers here, we actually did a thing for teachers, which is really interesting. Tips for teachers on building an inclusive culture. It's been picked up already in Brazil and it's now been translated into Italian. And Spanish, so it's actually seems to have been picked up as something worthwhile. So I've got some copies of it if people are interested. But this is a key thing of building an inclusive culture, so all of the children are actually included in the school. all students in the same lesson, and the playgrounds are interactive and all kids are not separated off into different classrooms, etc. Now, I keep on mentioning girls because I think this is the best example of this issue. What happened to girls? Is that true? In other words, they were denied education a couple hundred years ago, weren't they? We basically didn't educate girls, they were just left out. They weren't part of the thing. And then, this gives an idea of how old I am. I went to a segregated government primary school. How about that, eh? The boys' campus, the girls' campus. There was no interaction in primary school. Do you reckon the girls got a good deal as the boys? I doubt. And then, what happened in high school? The boys did science, what did the girls do? Yeah, home science, home economics. Touch typing. Life skills. Does that ring a bell? The saying life skills? In other words, the way that girls were kept at the margins of education was to accept them in physically, but teach them life skills, not include them in the same curriculum as the boys. Has that got any ring of truth about it in terms of this area? Same sort of thing is actually happening. Then they were allowed into maths and science, but discouraged. How many of you, women, reckon you're really good at maths and science? Got 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's good. That's more than 4. Normally, women say, no, I'm hopeless at maths. Would that be true, generally? They say, oh, no, I can't do that. I'm not very good at it. Because you've been taught that girls aren't very good at maths and science. Now, it's only, I think it was around about 2010, girls started to outperform boys in maths and science at the Leaving Certificate. Now, how long did that take, that change in culture, to saying, well, of course, they're fully included. So we're talking about something that's massive here. This is really big. Now, I hear the same things about kids with a disability now as was talked about girls 100 years ago. Almost identical language. You can almost pull out quotes and I hear them in staff rooms. Now, the same sort of things being actually saying. So I think this is the key issue here is the belief that this stuff can happen and then things start to actually go. And to give you an idea, in Alberta in Canada, they've been including people with an intellectual impairment in university courses for over 20 years now. Oh, that's a bit funny, isn't it? At East County University, they've got a student with very significant disabilities in WAPSA. Attitudes. Okay, so let's look at what works best. As Darryl said, it's the will and the skill. If the will precedes the skill. If people don't want the child included, we really battle, because that's a moral issue. That's the other thing to think about, is inclusion is a moral question. We know the research. The research kids do much better in regular school. That's just clear. We've got now 40 to 50 years of research absolutely demonstrating, without doubt, kids do better if fully included. Any withdrawal from full inclusion has academic costs. Kids actually lose percentile ranks if they move from inclusion into segregated education. They move backwards in relation to their peers. So in terms of why we should do it, it's undeniable. The question is, who belongs in this school? Who's going to be welcomed? That's a moral issue. Because we know that they belong there. The question is, what's this school's moral attitude to that? It's really interesting in terms of Christian schools, isn't it? You know, the Samaritan? It's interesting. Okay, need to build an inclusive culture. The other thing is coming out, this is partnership with parents. We did some research looking at the inclusion, got parents to rate their state on how well they were doing inclusion. We've done that twice, 2003 and 2014 or something. Anyway, there's some articles there. But part of that was we got teachers who were really good at inclusion, because these were referred by the parents as this teacher's really good at inclusion. And so we asked them, what's the most important thing for inclusion to work? What do you reckon it was? Partnership with parents. That was the highest rating issue. It was something like over 70% of them scored that as a key issue in terms of inclusion working. Partnership with parents. Second, number 2, collaboration with colleagues. Then you got down to all of the teacher aides and all that sort of stuff. These 2 things were the actual key stuff. Okay, there's collaboration with colleagues, etc., and collaboration across. Well, so it's a whole thing of everyone working together, and you saw that with what Michelle was talking about. Now, this is really interesting. The class-wide peer tutoring. This has been shown to be one of the most powerful methodologies of actually getting inclusion working, where the kids become the tutors. And if it's done class-wide, rather than just the kid with a disability getting tutored, if there's other people tutoring in all sorts of organisations, what they find is the academic progress of all kids goes up. Because to teach, you've got to know, haven't you? So in terms of just, if you're a teacher and you sort of say, how the hell am I going to get this to work? Yeah, just ask the kids. And you actually get them engaged in it, and almost certainly you'll find that you'll get away through that. This is another thing that's actually... Yeah?
Can I just example of it? Sorry. We had a meeting with our teachers the other day. My daughter's year 3. She's reading at approximately year level. Still probably maybe lagging a little bit behind some of the kids, but getting very close. There's quite a lot of hard work that we put in at home, and also the teachers. Our school's got quite a lot of expats that come in, and there's a little girl who's Japanese, and her reading's trailing quite a bit. And the teacher recognised the opportunity for my daughter to be a tutor. And so she's, with the EA, she was basically taking the lead, and basically giving the little girl, whose English is second language, strategies to sound out words, identify words, and they do work. And she was to be a tutor. And you can imagine the sense of achievement and the sense of purpose that gives her. So I guess a lot of that is recognising those opportunities and making the most of them when they're there.
Because what we find is that actually in primary school there's almost no trouble about inclusion with kids. They interact really, really well. Up to about grade 5. Do you know what happens in grade 5? Around about grade 5. Boys and girls split. Do you notice that? The boys play with the boys and the girls play with the girls. So potentially half the support group is lost around that time. And then high school is a very dangerous time because of the thing about, if you make friends with a kid with a disability, you may be picked on yourself. So these are times when we need adult intervention. But what we find is that you won't believe this, but there's some really nice teenagers out there. And when we ask, we get always, I've never got a situation where I've asked and haven't got them. Can you give us a hand to work this out, or to help include character, or would you like to join in? And this is this bunch of mates idea. This is particularly, it's going on in Adelaide and Canberra at the moment in a big way, where they actually set up a situation where a student in a high school, which is a bit, it's a difficult sort of situation, where they get a group of kids who volunteer to become a bunch of mates. They meet together about once a fortnight with the teacher to discuss how he's going, how all the inclusion's going and so forth, and they make sure that he's not picked on the playground, he's actually engaged in games, all of that sort of stuff. And it's a very powerful sort of strategy of actually getting that social inclusion going. And it totally wipes out bullying. Because if you've got half a dozen mates who are going to stick up for you, no one picks on him, picks on that child. So it's a these are just general sort of strategies that are actually looked at.
Can I just
Yeah.
say something there? So we had the ball, obviously, in year 12, and we just asked, the learning support coordinator asked the students if there would be anyone, no pressure, but would anyone in essence, we do this massive big red carpet walk that is huge, and we had a lot of volunteers, and in actual fact, the girlfriend of our apprentice and her friend happily walked. So they went in the car together, they got out, they walked all up together and went into the ball. So I think that perception that high school kids would be interested is actually, I really support that. They actually just ask them, they're happy to help.
And, for example, a child with autism who's having real troubles at school, being totally isolated, high school, and I just got, so the kids got in the class of kids, or his peers, without him there, and so I said, what is it? What's the issue? And he said, he tells lies. And I said, okay, give me an example. And he said, he's sort of, how teenagers talk about what they did in the weekend, and they always talk about their drinking. These are 15-year-olds. And he would come in and say, I had a bottle of Jack Daniels on the weekend. And of course, they'd all know that he was lying, and then they'd tend to reject him on that basis. And then I said, well, does anyone tell him that? And no. Anyone willing to tell him that? Yeah, I'll do it. Anyone willing to help him to actually interact with others? Yeah, I'll do that. You always get these kids come out of but you need to ask them. They won't do it by themselves, because if they did it by themselves, they may get picked on. But if they do it because the teacher asked me, then then we're actually getting something going. The key, though, is this sharing the same tasks. If you were here working with Mary down the back on something totally different, and everyone goes out to socialise outside, what's the probability of you going out and finding that person with Mary, who's doing something totally different? Very low, isn't it? But if you're sitting around the table doing the same task, and then playtime comes, is a much higher probability that you'll go out and play in the playground. So this issue of sharing the same tasks has got a much bigger issue than just the inclusion in the curriculum. It also has massive social implications at the same time. Other things about grouping. Quite often teachers group it on the basis of who wants to sit together. In other words, student choice, which is one idea. But maybe that's not the most powerful way. What's likely to happen if kids choose who they play with, or who they sit with? Who's teachers here? Anyone got some teachers? Yeah. So what happens? They choose the same people, and probably someone they want to talk to and interrupt the class, and etc., etc. So that's one strategy. But if let's say you want to learn how to play tennis, and you've got two options. One is a club where everyone's better than you, or a club where everyone's worse than you. Which one would you be more likely to get better at tennis? Okay, can you see the club where they're better than you? That pulls you up. Now that's a very important message for grouping. If we can have the majority more competent and a small minority of less competent, that's going to be a more powerful mix than the other way around. Can you see that? If most people are less competent and one is competent, they'll tend to go down. Similarly, if you put all the people who are incompetent together, what's going to happen? Shared ignorance, isn't it? It's not a logical thing to do. Just think about the logic of this. This is, I think, one of the things that really hit me when I first started to question this whole stuff. Okay, we get kids who are developmentally delayed. We put them together with other kids who are developmentally delayed, so all of the models are also incompetent. We do this, we give them a lower powered curriculum. We do this for the whole of the developmental period in order to teach them how to be included. Duh. It ain't going to work, is it? Does it work? I mean, the fundamental question is, does special education work? When you actually look at, they go through this, how many get to an ordinary life? by going through that system? You know, that's the question. And if they don't, we need to be thinking of something different. Okay. Yeah, so we've go through that. All right, so now some of the strategies we're actually looking at are including people in the curriculum. We go through some sort of examples of this. Okay, universal design for learning. Have you heard about this? Some of you heard a bit about it? Okay, the basic idea is, we literally built a house, my wife and I, a few years ago, and we built, because I'm getting a bit old, to die in. It sounds a bit macabre, but basically it's fully accessible, but you wouldn't pick it. You wouldn't notice anything different about my house to any other person's house. It's got a ramp up the side, but, you know, so what? All the doorways, you could get a wheelchair in. The bathrooms have got access next to the toilet. You could actually put a thing. The showers are in such a way that there's minimum steps, etc., to get in. But you'd walk into my house and I bet you wouldn't pick it unless you were actually aware of that. Now, that's universal design in architecture, so anyone could basically live in that house. The same idea is in education. How do we actually design a situation so everyone can access the same information? Because, as we know, different people operate differently in situations. So the first thing is there's multiple ways that we can engage a child in a task. So, okay, let's say that we've got something like this. Okay, we're teaching Macbeth. And you've got those kids who can't read in the class. Do you know how many kids hit high school unable to read? To grade 5 or better? Anyone got any idea? There's 30. 30% of kids, and we've got data on this for 15 years at one school, hit high school unable to read grade 5. And the textbooks are normally written to grade 6. So in other words, that's the basic thing. So you've got all these kids in your class, you've got a third of the kids in the class that probably can't read. You know, let's say we're doing Shakespeare, haven't got a hope of doing that. How would you engage those kids in the Shakespeare class? They're not going to read it, are they? Sorry, yeah. Different formats. So let's think of the different formats of engaging kids. How could we engage those kids in the Macbeth situation? A movie would be one great thing, wouldn't it? So you can actually watch a movie of Macbeth. That would be certainly one way of engaging those kids in that situation. Other ways? Audio books. So we can actually do an audio book situation of that. When you were going through your year 12 and you were doing... Any of you did Shakespeare in year 12? How did you do it? I bet you just didn't totally just study the play, did you? Yeah. Oh, rubbish.
Was Shakespeare still alive when you were doing it?
Yeah, that's right. How did you do it? Sorry? Performed a play is certainly a great way, isn't it? So that would be one of the ways that they could actually act a play. But also one of the ways I certainly did it was I looked for the cribs, didn't you? You know, those little cheat sheets on Macbeth to explain what the hell was this all about? There we can engage the kids with that. So we get a plain English translation of Macbeth to get them actually the possibility of them being engaged in it. Okay, doing a play, might be another way along that same lines? Yeah, historical. You could actually go to it from a historical perception about, how this all worked. Oh, storyboard it. Okay, yeah, absolutely, storyboard it. And take that a bit further, storyboard it into making a film. So, yep, yeah, anime. Can you see what we're getting at? If we just start to sit down and think about this, there are multiple ways that we can engage kids when if we taught Macbeth cold, we're going to lose a huge number of the kids. But if we have multiple ways of doing it, engaging them, it's about that. Multiple ways the material can be presented to students. If you can't read a written exercise is not a really good way of doing it, is it? Of presenting material to the students. So again, what sort of things can we do? How can we present that material for kids who couldn't read? Just as we said, just verbally. I mean, audio, film, all of those sort of things. Different way we can actually engage those kids. And then, how do we assess them? Macbeth being... I like it, yeah, I like it. Yeah, Macbeth bingo, we can certainly do that. Yeah, we can certainly ask. Okay, we've got the student here, his only thing is eye pointing. How can we assess whether he knows the basic stuff? Yeah, you just put out choices and she's got to look at the correct choice. We can actually engage, so we can actually test, have they actually got that sort of information? We can actually okay, you've got to present a film. Yeah, it's fine, you can go, but you've got to come up with a film and that's going to be how you're assessed. We can actually do that. We could do it on a play. We could do it on drawings. If the kid's really good at drawing but can't write, there's another way that we could actually do that. A very specific example of this is a teacher who did this, a student who could read to about, I don't know, about grade 3 or something. So fundamentally basic competence in reading. Chances of her being able to read Macbeth? 0. I mean, we all struggle with it, don't we? So again, the teacher did that. Went and Googled it, found the cheats on Macbeth. Her role was that she had to read those cheat sheets. She had to find 3 pictures off the internet that could tell the story of Macbeth, paste it on the folder where the other students' essays were going to be collected. She probably knows more about Macbeth than you do, because she actually researched that, fully engaged in the thing, challenged to her level, and she's in the class. You get what I'm getting at? Not really huge. Another one was Looking for Alibrandi. Any of you read that? You know the book? A young woman, similar sort of situation, got some reading, not much, no chance of being able to cope with the question which was being put to the other students. Okay, analyse the relationships between Jodie and 3 other characters and describe how you think that was, and give examples of how that was occurring, or something, some essay like that. Not a hope that she would understand that. How would you do that? Movie would be one. Yes, certainly you can go to the movie. But in terms of building an assessment, we're trying to get the idea of getting her involved. So she's got to do her essay, but she's not going to be able to do the essay there. I mean, it's a bit of a challenge one, but what the teacher did, I thought was brilliant. She said on page 271, Jodie is talking to 3 other characters. Look at that page, describe what's happening there, and tell me how each of the people are feeling. How you think each of the people are feeling. Now, she could manage that. Here's an actual, set-off area, and she could manage that, pushed her quite hard, engaged in the same thing. She probably, again, knew more about Alibrandi than we do. So it's a really major thing. We're not talking about, again, rocket science. This is sort of straightforward. Other things we need to know about inclusion are the basic things of what works in schools. These are things for teachers. And what we find is that the things that work best for kids with disabilities, lo and behold, tend to work best for the other kids as well. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of John Hattie. He's an amazing character. He looked at the research, basically all the research that's ever been published in education for, I don't know, about 40 years or something, because if any of you are teachers, you know what happens. Someone comes in and says, this is the way you should teach. They have this new fad. And, they implement this fad in the schools, and then 2 years later they've decided there's a new fad that comes in. I mean, some of you have been through the education, you may have been through outcomes-based education. You remember that? Sort of, then those waves go through. And teachers get really cynical. Oh, here we go again, you know, some mad bureaucrat's done it again. But of course, they find that a lot of this stuff just doesn't work. So what Hattie did was basically said, well, okay, if we don't let kids go to school, if they never go to school, what happens? Well, actually, they learn. They learn about what's called 0.2 of a standard deviation. That's the sort of the difference. Just learning off your local community is about 0.2 of a standard deviation. So if what you're being taught to do or asked to do isn't better than 0.2 of a standard deviation, you'd be better off leaving the kid alone and not leaving him at school. Now, then there's what does the average teacher in the average classroom produce? That's about a 0.4 of a standard deviation. So if it's not better than 0.4 of a standard deviation, maybe you shouldn't do it. 52% of the things that are in the literature recommending what teachers should do no better than the average teacher in the average classroom. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? So the majority of these fads that go through are highly likely to produce less impact than the average teacher. But there are, and then if we look at what actually does work, you know this thing about, oh, kids learn by themselves, discovery learning? Well, that's the one on the facilitator line. Remember, 0.2 is leaving them alone, not even going to school. Some of them are worse than actually leaving the kid alone and not going to school. This is amazing. A lot of things that are being recommended for teachers to do are actually going to make kids worse than if you left the teacher alone to do what they were doing anyway. Whereas the things that do work are direct teaching. Teach the child. When you want to teach something, you teach the child. And as you can see down those, look at the difference in the power. Some of them are twice as powerful, nearly twice as powerful as the average teacher in the average classroom. So that's some of the information about if we start to do these sorts of things in the average classroom, the child with a disability will get it, but also the other kids will get it. So the very fact that we can do this sort of stuff is really good. Okay. Let's get a bit, just go through this and I'll get Darryl to talk afterwards. The other way that came up was this what came from the University of Oregon. And this was, how do we teach the diversity? How do we actually include not only the child with disability, but also the very bright child and teach them simultaneously? That's a challenge for a teacher, isn't it? That's really what you struggle with. Okay. So what they said is that in any lesson, there are core concepts that you want every child to get. Like if you're teaching sentence composition, what are the key things you're after? Starts with, there's some core issues. There are only about 4 of them. Really basic stuff. I want every student to come out of my class knowing that. That's the core concepts. Then we're in the field of teaching the child with a disability. Then there's information you want more generally to expand that out into examples, and then you want some stuff to challenge kids. Like, for example, here, we'll test, you're all pretty smart. Give me a sentence that doesn't start, that's correct, that doesn't start with a capital. Good challenge? Sorry? Spoken, yes, yeah. It's actually spoken, inverted comma, ... Can you see that? Would be a correct sentence, going on. Again, sentence that doesn't end with a full stop. Question mark, yeah, but also ... is another way, that sort of situation. You can, you can keep on going through examples to actually push kids at the upper end to go, as well as getting everyone having that core information to get out. So, so that's quite an important thing, and so let's look at that a little bit more clearly. Yeah, so we can include all children in relation to that, but let's think about this. When you walk into a lesson, what I want every student to know, if you walk into your lesson saying at the end of the day, if the end of this lesson or whatever it is, if every kid got these bits, I'll have had a good day. And I bet you it's about 2 or 3 things. Would that be right, as the teachers? When you really get down to the core issues are normally 2 or 3 things. Now you're in the field of how I teach a child with a disability. I can teach them that. Then you're wanting information that I want most children to know, which is the examples, the extensions, all of those sorts of things. And then what's the information I want some kids to know, which is how I can push those kids who are at the top. So in terms of teaching, if you just walk into a classroom on the basis of knowing what's the key things here that I want every child to know, you're in the field of absolutely being able to include everyone. I can't think of examples where you couldn't actually do that once you've got your core stuff. And anyone can throw examples at me and we can certainly have a go at those. Do you get what I'm getting at? This is core information. So if we really think about it, getting back to that, how many of those do you know? You're getting a bit close to the bottom by now. But I bet you do know the bottom. I reckon you know the bottom 3. Probably bottom 4. Everyone happy with those bottom 4? Atoms, electrons, neutrons, protons. As soon as you get past that, we really don't know, do we? So in terms of actually teaching, if we got the student come out of the atomic physics class knowing those 4 things, we've done a pretty good job, because that's all they got out of you. All of us, isn't it? So that's it. So yeah, the basic idea is we only need the core concepts to be considered educated. Is that true? There's a lot of stuff we can let go. These are the core concepts. And unless we use it regularly, like those core skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, a lot of it's just lost. It's much more of what's actually going on in relation to the situation. So I'd just like you to think a bit. What's the purpose of education? Valued members of society, yeah. It's a really interesting question. I asked this to my teacher students, and a lot of them just come up with the obvious ones. Oh, to prepare kids for life.
But there's also a political response to that
Yeah.
question. So
Yep.
sometimes gets in the way of
Yep.
arguments.
Oh, absolutely. But I think that one of the core issues of education is to socialise children into the culture. In other words, if you think about what we do, as a teacher, we get these feral kids at age preschoolers. I mean, they are. Some of them are totally spoilt. Some of them have been totally neglected. Some of them are, all over the place. And within 2 weeks, that preschool teacher's got them saluting. Isn't it amazing when you think about it? Pulls those kids into social into the culture and makes them into little Aussies. Now, I don't think that there's any more important thing about education than that, to make us into a cohesive society. Isn't it? Aren't we? We're really good at it. When you think about it, we're really good at building a cohesive society from one of the most multicultural countries in the world. And that's educators doing that. It's never acknowledged. Now, all we're saying is kids with a disability should be part of that, made into little Aussies. Then you start looking at the things like core material and so forth. You've got a bit of a picture of how we might do some of this stuff? Any questions? Okay. Well, we break from afternoon tea now.